Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. On today's show, we have Shannon Nuszen. She's gone from evangelical Christian missionary to observant Jew. Raised in a devout Christian household, Shannon immersed herself in missionary work, engaging with Jewish communities under the guise of friendship while subtly promoting Christian beliefs. However, her commitment to seeking truth led her to questioning her own convictions and ultimately culminating in her conversion to Judaism over 15 years ago. Today, as a founder of B'nai, I think I said that right, an organization dedicated to monitoring and exposing missionary activity in Israel and beyond, Shannon tirelessly advocates for the preservation of Jewish identity and faith. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting.
It is exciting. So the first question I ask literally every guest is, how did you relate to religion the first 18 years of your life?
I didn't really have a choice. I was born into it. I was born to an evangelical Christian family, not just any evangelical Christian family. My father was an Assemblies of God minister, so fundamentalist Christian. Spent some time in the United Pentecostal Church. From there, like non-denominational, which is very denominational, but mostly all in the evangelical world.
Yeah, personally, did you feel like it was just your entire life? Was it like there was no outside world, or there was an outside world and it was scary? Like internally, what were your kind of feelings towards the religion as you kind of moved spot to spot?
It was my world. It was normalcy to me. It was everything I knew, church all the time. It wasn't a question. I had no questions. For me, it was a safe place. I enjoyed it. I kind of threw myself into it, even though it would have been expected. My father being, the minister that he was, very involved, and I loved it. I was part of the youth groups, and when there was missions available, I was part of them. It was my community. It was my friends. It was simply everything I know. So I didn't know how to identify with anything else. I did take to it very well. I was a shy kid, and I think something that I felt was from, when you're a baby, you're taught about, that Jesus loves you, but also that he died for you, and you have a purpose, and you have to follow what that purpose is. So to have a purpose in your life, and always feeling like you were doing the work of God and you were trying to please God, and you owed it because, of course, this man died for you. And there was no gauge of sin, no big sin, no little sin. Sin is sin. And, it put him on the cross, and, you owe your life to this person. So I was constant in a state of indebted, and that I owe this to this person, and this person sacrificed so much for me, that I'm going to put everything I can into it. It was also what I felt labeled me as the oddball. I probably was an oddball. I was not a popular kid, but I took that on as, I have my Bible and I'm a Christian, and being a Christian means I'm going to be persecuted. So that's why I don't fit in. And, all of those things that the mean kids do to you and the reasons they don't like you is because you're being persecuted for Christ. So it sort of fit into my narrative of my thinking, the low self-esteem that I had, but then I had power in another way. I guess it's very strange and surreal to talk about now.
Yeah, it can be, but man, is it relatable? I mean, like I can relate to those feelings of I had really bad, I was to the point of being kind of suicidal and emo back in my day, and that was kind of my personality. But I had church saying, here's the magic button, pray to Jesus, and like this will be enough to sustain you. And that kind of bred a sense of obligation, right? This is my way of survival. So I am obligated to kind of follow this path, if you will, no matter where it takes me, which is a fairly like militant mindset to be putting into a child. At least that's how it felt for me. I don't know if that resonates with you too.
No, I would probably use a stronger word. I'm probably not popular in that world, but I flat out say it's trauma. I think it's child abuse. I think it's abuse that has become socially acceptable. I don't think it's a good thing at all. I do think there are good aspects of the church that I was thankful for and maybe kept me out of trouble in certain ways, but I don't think it was worth the trauma, for sure. There are things, I was raised the way I was, and I think I was fearful and quiet and shy because I had so much fear built into me from an infant. I had a huge burden of carrying that the person that loves me the most, and I loved Jesus the most. Being picked on as a kid and not so popular, and he's even the adults in your life, everybody in your life. It's not easy being a kid, and that the only person who really loves you and the only person you can trust is him. He becomes your only stable force in your life, the core of everything you believe. He becomes part of you, and it's a very mixed, weird way to grow up. The fear of hell is terrifying. I wasn't allowed to watch horror movies. I wasn't allowed to watch much TV at all. The Smurfs were bad because they represent, the blue Smurfs represent death and their black lips. And He-Man was wrong because he gets his power from Grayskull. And Disney is wrong because they slip in messages. Everything was the devil and everything was bad for you. You couldn't listen to secular music because it was bad for you. TV always has bad messages and sexual things, and horror movies were like off limits. But if you think about it, we were being taught horror movies, worse than horror movies, that they were very real to us, and we were told that they were real, worse than any horror movie I've ever seen. The descriptions of hell, and that there is no big or small sin. You steal a cookie out of the cookie jar, you're going to hell. You deserve to die. But then there's this wonderful man, the ultimate victim, who took it for you. It's fear. It's a burden. They move from that when you're a child. It was around my teenage years where there were youth group meetings where we would learn about the tribulation. And there was this series of movies about the tribulation. And then you learn about the rapture. And
talking about Left Behind.
Yes, Left Behind. And it was the series before that. I think it was like made in the 70s. But The absolute fear of everybody I know and love, and I'm going to be completely alone in this world if I'm not right with God at the moment, that twinkling of an eye when everybody in my world disappears. And I'm left in this world that Satan is going to rule for 7 years. I have to fend for myself. So you always want to be right with God. If that happened at any moment, that's terrifying. It's a terrifying way to live. And then if you are left to be here in the tribulation, they bring that back the guillotine, and you have to accept the mark of the beast. And if you don't, you're going to die for it. You're going to be killed. If you do accept the mark of the beast, you're cut off. And when the end of the tribulation, you won't survive that. When the battle of Armageddon happens, you'll be gone. There's no turning back. That's all terrifying. It was really, and it wasn't taught that it was a horror movie. It was your life, and this is what you have to look forward to. So, it was extremely effective.
Yeah, it is effective. I mean, it's really does mold your mind into a very vulnerable and controllable state. Because again, yeah, you're just kind of have this indoctrinated sense of obligation of like, well, whatever I need to do to like make sure that I'm on the right side of this battle, like let me do that. And also, kind of to add to I also agree that it's abuse, and part of that abuse, in my opinion, even in maybe some of the less extreme iterations of some of that messaging, is that you're taught somehow all of this is love. Like that really kind of messed with my mind into my adult years, is seeing that like somehow a God setting up a situation where your only chance of survival is believing very narrow doctrines, and that's how he loves you. I mean, that's teaching abuse as love, and that can mess up your psyche in so many ways.
Right. That's perfect way of explaining it. And I have watched a documentary recently that the entire evangelical movement and those teachings, they produce perpetual victims. And that is absolutely true. You're taught to be a victim your entire life, and it harbors and protects abusers. It's a very dangerous world, and it's amazing that it's done the damage that it's done and hasn't been called out and is just being accepted by society. It's a little scary when you take a look from the outside.
Yeah, you and I agree. Hence, we do the work we do. It is really kind of like insane how normalized some of this stuff is. And you feel a little gaslighted sometimes when you're in this work. You're like, am I crazy? Like, they're saying this and we're just all cool with it. I see this, you even briefly mentioned like anytime there was opportunity for missions, you were kind of ready to take it. Is this like short-term missions and youth group? Is that kind of your introduction to missionary work?
It was youth group things. It was outreaches. My father started a street ministry for like gangs and at-risk kids that we would bring in. And when I was young, it was mostly street things. When I became older and there was a turn sort of messianic, like mixing the Jewish things into it, I really liked that a lot. I felt drawn to that. And of course, there's lots of reasons why Jews are prioritized. So I felt, and they're much more challenging. So I felt the Jewish evangelism particularly was more challenging because this was an odd group that I was sort of fascinated with. So I thought I was going to be a missionary to Jewish people. And that's how it started. I started going to kosher restaurants to meet Jewish people. I was infiltrating into their world. I was joining the JCC and taking classes there. I was volunteering there. Elderly people are very much a target. So they have a program, Meals on Wheels, where they every day deliver meals to elderly
I'm
people.
very familiar with Meals on Wheels. Yeah,
Oh, yeah?
that was part of my church. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would volunteer everywhere I could, any way that I could, to meet Jewish people and become a familiar face in their community so that I could befriend them. When people say missionary, they think of, the Jews for Jesus guys handing out pamphlets on the street. And in evangelical Christianity, it's not a profession. It's not the professional missionary who's out there with the tracts. It's everybody is trained to be this army of God. And, you're supposed to share your faith at work and to your neighbor and to the mailman and to everybody in your life. That's your mission and that's your purpose in life. You have to tell everybody.
Sell, sell, sell. I mean, like, they don't say it that way, but that's ultimately what it is, right? There shouldn't really be a moment in your life as an evangelical Christian where you're not doing it. And I think it really directly ties to some of that, like, fear of hell and just the social and personal cost they keep adding to the narrative as you get older. It becomes very scary that there's some people who might suffer these horrible things that we've been taught. And so, like, in some ways, your motive is a mixed bag, right? Like, some of your motive is your own, like, personal shame kind of projecting onto other people, for sure. But in other ways, I think there's, like, a personal motive to, like, no, I want people to not suffer, so I'm going to do this thing that I believe will help people. Was that kind of part of your draw as well?
Right. And with their rejection of it, I thought, they just don't know better. It's like watching somebody in a fire filled building, and you need to get them out of there. And it doesn't matter, what's messed up in their head or why they're fighting you. You've just got to throw them over your shoulder and get them out of there. And once they're out of there, they'll realize that you saved them and that they needed that. That was very much what I felt I was doing. I had no idea that I was hurting people or that, infringing on people, or I didn't see it as offensive. I really felt, it was from a good place. I think most of Christianity is coming from a good place. I don't think that people intentionally do things wrong. I think they don't look from the outside and see it with critical thinking minds. I think that culture breeds closed minds.
Definitely agree. I mean, that's sort of how this all happens. And it's a little disturbing, I guess, that humans can kind of be molded so strongly. I'm wondering for you personally, you're saying you're having this draw to specifically mission work towards Jews. Do you think that was like theologically driven? Do you think that was like aesthetically driven? Do you think like it was sort of like just the challenge of it all, or what? Like, was there one specific thing, like now kind of looking back, that you can see was the draw?
It was the challenge I liked. It was sort of like there was a hierarchy of a rank of missionaries, and because Jews are prioritized, that was like the most difficult to reach. It was, I was taught a lot of things about Jews and Judaism, which is, I have a very different perception now, but I was taught that they were unreachable. They're actually listed as the an unreached people group. They were actually on that. So reaching those were, a challenge, but it was also learning the specific scriptures about that Jews are prioritized, to take it to the Jew first and then the Gentile, and then learning that the rapture and the tribulation, the second coming, was not going to come until the Jews say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So it's the Jewish people that trigger the second coming, not the whole world. Although they have a world focus, they prioritize the Jews. So one, it was a mission of being, a catalyst to the second coming. And then I had, a personal role in that, and I could be used as a vessel of God to bring that about. That's pretty powerful. And then it was the challenge of it. It was a very different type of missionizing, which now I see as deceptive. Telling people that they have sin and Jesus died for you, and, everybody has things they don't like about themselves. And, you can have forgiveness, and you have somebody that'll be with you and love you unconditionally. And then you have the community aspects of a church and a support group. That was the way of missionizing, to anybody. But the Jews, you really had to know scripture. You had to know prophecies. You had to be able to argue those things, and use the text. So I found that more challenging, and I felt that they were ready. They were more aggressive, and I was ready to confront that.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because it's almost like apologetics and missionary work are kind of wrapped up in one in that field, because you're not necessarily starting, sort of an idealized or fantasized version of a missionary. To many evangelicals would be like someone's never heard of Jesus and you tell them all about it. And part of the I guess, sinister undertone of that is, yeah, they don't know any better, so I can tell them anything and they might believe me, which is also kind of problematic. It's interesting to see that kind of flipped on no, these people might actually know scripture a little better than you. So can you convert someone who might be more knowledgeable than you? I can see that as sort of appealing, especially if you're trying to be the best Christian, the most Christian-y Christian you can be. I think I can see that coming.
To be pleasing to God, and I felt that was a better way to do it. The fact that they knew scripture was a surprise to me, because I had been taught in Christianity that Jews didn't know their Bible, and they actually never looked at their Bible, or worse, that the rabbis forbid them for reading their own Bible, and that they actually took out parts of the Bible, which is a conspiracy. It's not true. So I was actually surprised that I ran into Jews who knew more than I did.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of just blatant anti-Semitism in evangelical circles, and a lot of conspiracy theories, and obviously in the recent years we've seen that explode. But at the same time, sort of using Jews as a Christian Zionist fantasy fulfillment type people group too. It's very cognitively dissonant, all of it. But what point in your story did you start to question these tactics and ethics involved in your own missionary work?
It was encountering some of those ones that knew more than I did. As a missionary, I went through and memorized every one of the prophecies that I was sure were fulfilled by Jesus. And I tried to argue with some of them, and they would laugh at me and say that I didn't have it right, that I was mistranslating things, and that I needed to go back and learn the Hebrew of that because it's not right. They were telling me that I was taking things out of context, and you need to learn the context of that first. And some of them say, yeah, your New Testament says that the Old Testament says that, but it doesn't. And in a way, I thought, okay, they're right, because I only know this one. I only know these certain verses that I quote. I'm going to accept their challenge, and I'm going to prove Jesus. I of course had no doubt that I was right and they were wrong. I just needed to, accept their challenge and read the whole chapter or the whole book if I had to. I was going to read it in context, and I was going to tell them that I was right and that it is in context. I would go back to the Hebrew, get somebody to help me with the Hebrew, show them that I'm not wrong. It still means Jesus. And one by one, every single one of the prophecies that I knew were absolutely true kind of fell apart. When you go back to the original text, they are mistranslated, and not even mistranslated. They're mistranslated in a way that make them appear Christological. So it was like the New Testament was intentionally written in a way to make it all look like Jesus. And that to me was sinister. That was evil. If you were to do that to a legal document, you'd be in prison. That's to know that somebody messed with my Bible and there was an agenda to it, because I was taught that the Bible is the word of God. It was heaven breathed. It's like holy, and you can't question it because it's absolutely the truth. So to find that out just felt like the ultimate betrayal. And then it was just a thread of that, just you pulled that thread and your whole world fell apart.
Yep. It's always interesting where the threads start because, I went to Bible college. I studied the Bible. I took 2 Hebrew classes, and I can still say things out loud, but I don't know what I'm saying. It was studying even the Christian version of the Hebrew that they wanted me to read was still not adding up. I was noticing that even in Bible college, I was like, we're making some big assumptions here once you start looking at original texts. And like kind of just, you can buy just like a Christian interlinear Bible and like do the translate from the Hebrew to what eventually comes out in English. And there's some significant gaps there, even in their like Christianized version. And that's not even talking about like once you actually start really digging into what was originally said the best we can. And kind of an existential crisis I was wrestling with while I was in Bible college was even in the New Testament, having all these gospels written so much later after Jesus lived, was that alone was kind of like a wait, what? And so the weird thing is that didn't really affect my faith too much because my faith commitment was always going to be transrational. My faith commitment was always going to like make the thing make sense in some spiritualized way. Because of my commitment, my thread tended to be kind of more once I started seeing just abuse upon abuse upon abuse upon abuse. And I think like both are so valid and both are so real when you talk to former Christians is you're like, there's always just kind of one thing that like you start pulling and it all falls apart. And then, I feel like it can go, if you start with the abuse stuff, you usually end up going back to the Bible and being like, wait a minute. Does any of this make sense? And then if you start with the Bible, you go, oh, this is why some of these abuses are happening. Do you feel like you had any experience like that?
I recognized abuse, but it wasn't what brought me to that. It was only later that I felt and understood the abuse that was happening. I originally just wanted to be a better Christian. And I think it's interesting when you look at people who are coming out of Christianity. When you said that it was abuse that brought you to first look at this, I can immediately hear the Christian arguments of, oh, that's why he left. He was abused. And that's why he lost his faith. And I get them. Yes. And you never were a believer. And it's...
Yeah, all the rest of it.
I hear that over that. And I hate to say that if it was abuse, because then that's the argument they're going to use. That she must have had a bad marriage or she had a bad experience and that's why. But no, and it's interesting that most people start out saying, well, I found my way out of Christianity when I started learning or I began researching something, or I thought I knew everything and I was just looking to learn more. It's the opposite when you hear stories of coming to Christianity. When you go into a church and you hear testimony, you hear, I was on drugs, I was in a ditch, I was laying in my own vomit, I was at the end of my rope, I was strung out on this or that or prostitutes, and my life was a mess. Everybody hits rock bottom emotionally and their life is torn apart, and that's when they encounter Jesus, or they were dying and they see Jesus appear to them. It's always in those forms. You don't hear that the other way around, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, it's not like, I was really struggling mentally and then I heard like a perfectly reasoned argument. And, there's people, I guess, who claim that. But then like once you dig into what they're actually saying, you can tell that the faith is very emotional and is very like sort of which, I mean, faith is a complex thing. I'll grant that. But I do find it interesting, too, that, yeah, I had to hit rock bottom to get out, not to get in. And I think this all ties to like the kind of the idea of missionary work, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what missionary work comes from and what it is. So what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about missionary work, maybe broadly, but even just within evangelicalism?
I think it gives people a lot of power and a lot of ego to feel that they are personally a vessel being used by God. And that, I'm going to get the most points. It's a challenge. I don't think the leaders are so much successful. People look at missionaries. You ask for misconceptions. People think, that Jews for Jesus and the leaders are the missionaries, but it's not. It's the lay people. It's the every right wing evangelical conservative Christian Zionist that is the missionary. It's a huge force, but I don't think anybody like Jews for Jesus or the leaders that we look up to and say that they're a missionary, I don't think they've ever converted a person in their life. I think it's those lay people, the friendships that we develop that are the most successful. It's your college roommate, your friend from school, your friend from work. It's those people. And that was the challenge in targeting Jewish people. I had to develop those friendships and those relationships because they can be a little more closed off. Sort of rightfully so. They've sort of been hunted for thousands of years and a lot of persecution. So it's not so easy to infiltrate, which was also a challenge. But if I was a friend, I was no longer considered a missionary. And once you make that personal connection, people don't feel proselytized because we're just friends talking about faith and how we handle things. Of course, every conversation, I was always trying to and leading them into asking questions so that we could have those conversations about faith. But most people who've been proselytized have no idea they've been proselytized unless they're meet one of those obnoxious ones on the street that give you a tract.
Right. Right. Yeah. I wonder if that's like that might be a misconception too, that like the majority of mission work is something like tracts or is something like, street preaching or stuff. And don't get me wrong, that's still very much a thing. But I would say the majority of missionary work is indeed covert, like, and is not like an overt, like, I'm a missionary doing this. I mean, that's why some countries have missionary visas that like missionaries ignore, this, I think that's well pointed out, and also well pointed out and articulated really well is that like, yeah, if you're an evangelical, you're a missionary, like kind of by definition, if at least if you're a good one.
In my work, I think I respect them, the overt ones, a little bit more. I wouldn't want them to be on my every street corner, but in a way, they're so offensive and so in your face that they call attention to what that world is about, and they sort of offend people and bring awareness to the issue more than I do.
Well, and it's like it's more intellectually honest, and it's like I'd rather be stabbed in the front than the back, So it's sort of along those lines. But I also think maybe another misconception, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that missionaries do a lot of like humanitarian aid. especially when you're thinking about missionaries to like maybe third world countries or things like that. What do you think about that conception that missionaries do humanitarian aid?
I don't think it's a misconception that missionaries do a humanitarian aid. I think there's a tremendous amount of humanitarian aid. I'm watching that right now. We're at war in Israel, and it is unfortunate, but Israel is extremely dependent on Christian aid. And right now it's sort of like an all hands on deck situation. And they don't have the background that I have here. Their guard is down and they have no idea what they're dealing with. They do bring in a lot of money. They do bring in a lot of humanitarian things. They're bringing equipment to the army. They're bringing food. They're bringing vouchers. There's a tremendous amount of money flowing in to help people. But is it without an agenda? It absolutely is with an agenda. They're bringing it for a reason. Right now, it's a time of war, so there's dead Jews. Unfortunately, bring a lot of money, and that's the situation right now. But even when it's not in a time of war, they are here and they are setting up shelters for the most disgusting to me is shelters for the elderly, trying to outreaches to nursing homes. That affect, I don't know why it does, but it affects me worse than the other efforts, because these are people who survived the Holocaust and still strongly identify as Jews. There's no one way to define what a Jew is. Madonna, Adam Sandler, there's every type of Jew. But they've always held on to their identity. And these are Holocaust survivors who've survived, a hell that we can't even imagine. So at the end of their life, when they're in a nursing home and lonely, to target those people is just more disgusting to me than anything else. They always hit the most vulnerable, the low-hanging fruit, the poor, the very young, the very old, the people who are hurting the most. Those are easy targets. And they disguise it. I would say it's not a misconception because they are supplying the aid, but it's definitely disguised. There's an agenda behind it. There's a reason they're doing it. And each person in America supporting it, or all over the world supporting it, is wanting to take part of that effort. They believe that they're supposed to save the Jewish people. They believe they're supposed to save the world. So financially, they'll support those, and it's as if they're taking part in that work of God themselves. So there's a tremendous amount of money put into missions.
Yeah, it can be haunting. I think one time I did like a rough estimate myself, and I was like, missionary work might be $1 trillion industry, like worldwide. And that was like kind of haunting to, I don't have hard numbers to back that up, but it was just kind of like going off of like some of the limited data I did have, which is also probably a problem too, is, we don't really have like firm, transparent records of how this is all operating either. Which can be kind of scary in and of itself. I agree with you that like it makes sense that the nursing home thing would be particularly upsetting because, it exactly what you were saying, the targeting of the vulnerable, that's almost like built into missionary frameworks. I feel like is the more vulnerable they are, the more they need us. But what's not being said is the more vulnerable they are, the more likely we can get them. Which would be a little bit more of an honest assessment, I think. So aside from that, can you describe maybe some other covert tactics that are often employed by missionaries that you find particularly problematic?
Oh, I deal with like the very deceptive, very covert. They've gotten, to the point of where they dress and act like Hasidim, some of the most extreme Orthodox, and infiltrate, communities that are known to be impenetrable. They don't have connection with the outside world intentionally to safeguard their community, and they feel like it's insulated. But there are missionaries who have, gone to great lengths to infiltrate that community, dressing like Hasidim. Some of them have, taken on the title of rabbi, somehow, obtaining smicha, which is like an ordination to be a rabbi, performing sacred tradition rituals, a brit milah, which is a circumcision on babies, writing marriages, divorces, which in Judaism, there are certain ways things have to be done, laws of how things have to be done. So, in non-Jewish terms, it's like it's very much being violated and raped, and finding out that this thing that was very sacred to you was a fraud, and your child wasn't really circumcised the way he should have been. And rabbi divorces, especially, there's a special legal religious bonding that if it wasn't a kosher divorce, you're not really divorced. And then the status of the woman means she's tied. She was actually married. So if she remarries, she's actually committing adultery, and that child is given a status of a mamzer, of like an illegitimate child that's not allowed to marry anybody. There are tremendous ramifications according to Jewish law that take place when they do these things. Of course, they think they have no idea the harm that they're doing, and it's not right. When we talk about vulnerable people, I am a very big advocate for freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and I don't think that people should be stopped from doing the things that they want to do or choose to do. Any, sane Jewish person who wants to investigate Christianity or Islam or Eastern religions or whatever religion they want, if they really want to research that out and go make those decisions, by all means, they should be allowed to. I wouldn't want them to, but, I'm not against people being able to seek something out if they choose to. But when you prey on vulnerable people, that's where I have to draw a line and say that's sinister and that's wrong. And that was the type of missionary work that I was taught when I began learning how to evangelize Jews, because it started with small things like, well, you have to change your language. You can't say cross. You say, a tree. You can't say Christian. We use the word fulfilled Jew. We're just, it's just a Jew. It's just Judaism with a Messiah. It's not
Judaism
a church.
premium or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not a church. It's Bible believers. They mess with the terms and try to make it more Jewishy. And then they have these messianic synagogues where they dress everything up and they do the Jewish holidays and they all wear a talit. And even the women, they all wear kippah. They look like and play the role. They bring a Torah out. You don't see crosses. You see Star of David's, but it's very much Christianity dressed up in Judaism. And that gets into the deceptive parts, the infiltrating their community was wrong. I had things that I did that looking back, I think that was pretty wrong, because they didn't like that I would come into the JCC after they figured out I was a missionary. And then we would, leaving things around for people to find the tracks, they would immediately go in and throw them away. I learned to go into the bathroom and unroll the toilet paper, roll it in a few layers so that the staff didn't find it and throw it away, but whoever was in the stall would find it the next time.
Sorry to interrupt. You just I just realized an experience I had in a bathroom at a Panera Bread once now. I was like, why did this track fall out of the toilet paper? I never even crossed my mind that, yeah. That's so funny. I was like, oh, okay. Now that makes sense. Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, I think that you're right, that it's the deceptiveness of it all, right? I'm also a big advocate for free speech. Religious freedom right now in the US means something other than what it sounds like. So like the phrase makes me cringe, but on a like actual level, like, yeah, I do believe people should be allowed to believe whatever they want, practice whatever they want, as long as it's obviously not harming themselves or harming others. And, there's also like, really important cultural lens to see this all through, even if you are irreligious, right? Like, and just like understand the power dynamics that are at play in all of this. I do think that, well, I'll ask you, do you think like the attitude of missionary work, especially if there's deception, but just in general, is it like inherently dehumanizing to say, I need to go to this person to preach this message?
Not dehumanizing. I know we always prayed to feel called for. I think we all got different messages from God because we were all talking to a different God, it seemed. Like everybody was hearing the voice that they wanted to hear. That was always weird. We'd all pray and say, we're going to reach this type of person. God's telling me to reach this, that we have to reach this type of person. I guess it was odd to hear everybody's perceptions. And I guess that's why there's so many denominations within Christianity, because everybody looks at the Bible and reads something completely different than the next person. But the targeting, I don't know about dehumanizing. That word doesn't fit right to me, I don't think.
How about disrespectful? Does it feel disrespectful, or even like or just arrogant, frankly?
That's
to like
much
be
better.
doing that kind of work?
Disrespectful. Because if I asked you a question, sure, but that in your face stuff, or doing it in deceptive means, or coming into a place that is supposed to be safe to me and trying to sell me your whatever, that's it's not okay. Or tell me that something is one thing and it's not. If somebody's a vegan and they're a hardcore vegan and they invite you over, you don't bring a giant brisket and say, ha ha.
I appreciate the analogy as a vegan myself. Like it is true that like, and I've often said, my veganism isn't a religion. So like, I'm a lot more like relaxed, but if somebody was to spend all their time telling me how important it is I eat meat, like after a while, it's like, you understand that like, you're just disrespecting my viewpoint. Like you're not educating me. You're not showing me a better way. You're just assuming I'm too dumb to understand that you're right and I'm wrong.
Right. And I think everybody should be respected and they have a right to believe the way they want to believe. And that's mostly what I focus on, that red line of when they cross that line of disrespect. Here in Israel, it's a Jewish country, very respectful to every religion. I think every denomination of everything is focused here. There are temples of all sorts represented here. Lots of religions, claim Israel as the beginning and their foundation. Tour groups are here all the time exploring the Holy Land, because it's sacred to their religion. And Jews, I believe, respect that, but it's not respected in return here, I don't feel. In fact, the biggest problem in my work is that the first you call somebody out or try to expose these covert methods or warn the Jewish community that these deceptive means are being used against their community, the first thing they cry is persecution. We're being persecuted and freedom of religion. I said, wait, but your freedom of religion is infringing on my right to be who I am, in Israel. in our own homeland, which was established to get away from all of the persecution and the forced conversions and the pogroms and the Holocaust. That was the very creation of the state. So to say that freedom of religion means that Christians can, go rampant here and target Jewish people and try to make them into them, it's extremely offensive. And I don't think they see it. I think some see it, and I think they don't. I'm not going to use bad words. I don't think they care.
You're allowed to. I won't say anything, but the funny thing is that I mean, being on this side of the world, if you will, like seeing the weird possessiveness about Israel in Christianity is very insensitive is about the nicest way you could put it, to say that Israel somehow belongs to Christians, I think is actually just inherently wrong. I think it's just a wrong thing to believe. And I think and part of the reason I think it's a wrong thing to believe is what necessarily comes after that. It's okay, if that's what you believe, that Israel somehow belongs to Christians, I do kind of view that as inherently disrespectful of Jews of all sorts, observant or not, and so I'm pretty any tinge of Christian Zionism is pretty upsetting to me personally. And I also went to a school that was very dispensational, which is a theological framework, for those who don't know, that's just very, very I want to say kind of obsessed in all the wrong ways with Jews. And kind of making them fit into a very strange grid. It's a very niche version of Christianity, but it is a view that's out there, that's taught in many seminaries, that there are going to be exactly 144,000 Jews, or whatever, that are going at the end of time all of a sudden be Christians. And in the meantime, we can respect their faith, but we got to make sure that they stay in line. I mean, this is some of the rhetoric that's used.
I don't see that they even respect it in the meantime. That's been my experience. Right now, the core of Christianity is itself extremely anti-Semitic. They don't see it that way. But when you say we love the Jews, but they love us because Jews play a specific role in their theology, and it's the acceptance of Jesus that they want that will trigger the second coming, and that's why they love us. But fundamentally, it's anti-Semitic. When you're taught that the reason Jews are rejecting Jesus right now is because, Satan has blinded them. They have blinders over their eyes. They can't see it, but that all of the world wars and all of the horrible things that are happening in the world is because of their blindness and rejection of Jesus. And their rejection of Jesus is bringing about, these horrible things that are going to happen at the end of the world, that the Antichrist is going to come from the Jews. It's you're taught horrific things about the Jewish world.
Well, and to be frank, you're taught that the Jews are the ones who killed Jesus. I mean, whether it's explicitly said that way, which it is sometimes, or even implicitly said that way.
They were either responsible or they organized it. But they were definitely at fault.
And or they missed it, right? And they were too dumb to recognize that was the Messiah. I mean, it's all very and even language around how the Pharisees were so terrible becomes very anti-Semitic very quickly. And I think it's a damn shame.
Even their language, they call us Pharisaic Jews, in the Bible. I went to my pastor telling him I was having a hard time, bringing the gospel to certain types of Jews, and that I was, coming against these arguments. And I went to my pastors for help, and he said, these are the Pharisaic Jews. These are the Jews that killed Jesus. These are the Jews who were responsible for hanging Peter upside down, which isn't even in the Bible. But he flat out said, those are those Jews. And that's, but but at the same time, I love them. But you love the role that they play, but you actually hate and are extremely anti-Semitic in a very evil way.
Which, I mean, is basically a textbook abusive relationship, right? Like, I love you because of how you serve my ideas, you know? Like, that's like, I mean, in a marriage, like, it's like, I love the idea of you, but I don't love you. I mean, it's very similar to that kind of mentality.
Very much. But look at the parasitic relationship that we have right now going on. That is,
right.
It flat out terrifies me how dependent they are and naive that the Jewish community is, or do they knowingly do it? It's like each one is using the other.
Yeah.
I've heard so many Jewish
That's
leaders
always
say,
scary.
So what? At the end, we'll ask him if it's his first time or second time. Like, we'll take the money in the meantime, which it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, and I wrestle. I mean, a lot of this show is wrestling with the question of how much is this intentional and how much is it not, you know? And like, I don't know if we'll ever know, but like, you know, there's some very powerful people who benefit both financially and power wise from a lot of these ideologies. And like, you know, we'll use very like important human things like the need to belong, the need to, you know, find who you are and what your identity is, and exploit it for incredible things.
Right. I don't think we got into that, but when you left, I'm sure community was a huge pull. Not having your community and not having the support and not having the core of everything you believe and did in your life, losing all of that at once is not easy.
Yeah. And it's put there to keep you there, I believe. You know, it's not organic. It's a very controlled environment, but it's heartbreaking to realize, and it still is very real and very human to feel the divorce, as it were. Broadening this out a little, just like maybe thinking of mission work, not just to, you know, Israel, but like mission work all over the place, whether it be street preaching in the US or whether it be like, you know, going to third world countries or whatever. Like, what scares you the most about just missionary work in general?
Well, culturally around the world, the diseases they bring, the loss of cultures. I think we have a lot of angry cultures who are angry about being taken over. We have the American Indians and horrific things that were done to them. I think the Hawaiians are very sensitive of the wrongs that were done to them, of forcefully. You know, I think in my own world, the Jewish history of forced conversions, there's entire tribes and cultures. We don't know who's Jewish and who's not anymore because of all the forced conversions. There's an excellent South Park. I'm not going to promote South Park, but there's an excellent show.
That was about the last reference I thought you were going to make. That's awesome.
He goes to like Ethiopia, and there's like tons of they like trying to save everybody, the missionaries, and it's like mind blowing how accurate South Park is about the missionary work.
They get it right every now and then, let me tell you.
Right, but just forcing. You know, there's also there's a funny movie, Saved, which is like a spoof of exaggerating. And, you know, she throws the Bible and says, I am filled with the love of Jesus. She's like, throws the Bible and hits somebody on the back with it. It's like, it's hilarious. You know, that unconditional love does not extend if you don't buy into their narrative and accept everything that they're teaching you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, you know, it frightens me in the sense that it's just like, you know, just growing up in it and realizing that, like, no, they are not satiated till every corner of the world has their dogma. I mean, that is, and they're proud of it. They're proud that that's their mentality.
Like, it's an effort to make everybody the same. And we're going to do cultural church planting, and people are losing their cultural background. Some people, you know, I grew up in America. You know, we were the melting pot. Nobody really knows their culture anymore. And some people are very offended by that. And we had older generations that are offended that there are very special cultural things that are important to each person. We have the African American communities that are very angry. And I think the African American community we have now and all the struggles they go through are not at all the culture that they came from. They're, trying to reclaim their culture, but how the heck do you know what their culture was? It's so been forced in a different direction. So you lose. People are losing so much that they didn't have the right to choose. And I think the freedom to choose those is really important.
Yeah, me too. Hence, I, spend most of my time investigating cults and churches because I think that's the exact thing they take away. They take away your autonomy. They take away your agency. They take away like critical thinking, a lot of this stuff. And so, when it comes to the evangelical cult, as I call it, you have like everyone, like we've mentioned many times, everyone kind of is a missionary by definition when it comes to evangelicalism. Do you think that fact alone kind of poisons the entire belief system?
I think I imagine, the person with their ears closed and their eyes closed, and they're just not going to hear or see that. I don't know that it's going to make a difference being called a cult. I don't think all of them are a cult. I believe evangelical Christianity as a whole definitely is. Right-wing conservative evangelicals, Christian Zionists, definitely. I believe that there are more liberal mainstream, that it's more like a club. I wouldn't say it was a cult. Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, that feels more like clubbish to me. They're not focused on that missions, and they're not as controlling. It's sort of like a social kind of get together kind of thing.
A lot less dogmatic,
right?
For certain,
definitely. And I think you'll find that in Judaism also. You have various extremes in every type.
Well, I'm more fascinated with the idea of like, does the like ingrained like you must serve. So like one of the ways I define a cult as like when leaders control, contain, and convert followers. And that conversion piece is not necessarily evangelical, because there's obviously some cults that just like are kind of more isolationist, right? That aren't trying to like dominate the world, but they always have like a mechanism built in, right? Where it's like, there's no such thing as a single person cult, right? So they always have some sort of method of like converting someone to their belief, and it's like spelled out, and it's either overt or covert or what have you. I think the indicator that evangelicals are like obsessed with conversionism is like a big red flag to just cultish behavior in general.
Definitely. On the opposite side, I have been amazed at how difficult it is to convert to Judaism. It's not easy. There is, like you said, there is a mechanism. If you want to, you can. There's there's real truth to that being turned away. They make it very difficult.
That's what I'm saying. Like I've often joked, I'm like I'll always have a curiosity about religions, just because this is kind of my field of work. So I'm always kind of like fascinated just inherently. But like a green flag for me in Judaism is how hard it is to convert to it. Like I'm like, no, that's like a good sign, because if it's too easy, that makes me suspicious.
I've exposed the selling of conversions. I said, oh my gosh, like Judaism is like the only religion that people are paying, between $10,000 and $50,000 just to like, I want a membership card. It's mind blowing.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not saying there aren't any red flags in certain sects of Judaism either. I certainly think there are, but I would also, most Jews I've talked to would say, yeah, absolutely. And we'll tell you who they are, by name. And like, the thing is that, like you said earlier, like it's very hard to define a Jew, but I think like that's part of what evangelical Christianity is like so dangerous, is it's not hard to define. I mean, it's hard to define in the sense that it's broad, but it's not hard to define in the sense of like, these are very clear indicators that you're an evangelical Christian, and a very specific dogma you have to believe to qualify. And that dogma is inherently contained, as in, you are this people group and everyone else is the out group.
I think, but you only see that when you take a step back. I have learned not to judge anybody or accept anything at face value, and don't think you know where that person is coming from until you've been in their shoes. I think my mind has opened and expanded in lots of ways. I still deal and struggle with the trauma of the church, and in things that I don't even recognize sometimes. Even basic things that I think are just social etiquette and normal, and the establishment of a family and roles. And I thought, well, that's just society norms, and that's just accepted. And sometimes I find myself quoting things and say, wow, that's indoctrination from the church. And I actually watched a documentary, and I had actually quoted something similar to my husband just the day before, and then watched that documentary and went, oh my gosh, I am quoting exactly what I was raised in, and I want to stay so far away from that. But you still deal with the deprogramming, and because it was normal to you, and you feel that that's normal.
It's run so deep. The
deprogramming process is never ending.
It runs so deep, and it's also like so amazing. Like, and it makes sense why they're so gung ho about, whether it be baptizing infants or even baptizing like, people very young in the church. Like, if you can get someone early, like you've got their mind for a long time. Like, oh,
they are targeting children because of that. I have video that I have not exposed this case yet, but the person says the younger we get them, the better. And it's actually illegal to proselytize children in Israel, but which I think is a good thing.
Well, especially given the history that Israel's dealing with. Yes,
people are upset that it's against freedom of religion, but we have filters that we're putting on the internet for our kids to protect them from certain things. There are TV shows that are rated in the system so that parents have control of what their kids watch. They're fighting those laws. They're trying to undo those laws, but and some people say any laws against Christianity, or you're just trying to keep the gospel from being preached. No, at least keep your hands off the kids. Leave them alone.
Yeah. Boy, I'm in full agreement there. Just the arrogance of thinking that any law that even touches Christian behavior is somehow oppression is offensive at minimum. To call that oppression, and I hear it over here in the freaking United States, where we have a Christian message on our dollar bills. Like, people think they're oppressed. I mean, it's just it gets a little insane. What do you think overall? Is it just people are that convinced of the gospel, or is it other things going on? How are these evangelical Christians justifying like deceptive missionary tactics? Like, are they just, it's for a greater good, or how do they internally justify it? Like, did you have a justifying mechanism when you did it, or do you see a different one now? It kind of just blows my mind when I think critically about it.
The type of proselytizing I did, I felt was more cultural. I felt I was being culturally sensitive and bringing the gospel to them in a nicer way that they would accept. Sort of like when you take a child to get a shot at the doctor, you might not tell them we're going to the doctor to get a shot. You just want to get them in the car. So you'll tell them we're going to go out for ice cream just to get them in the car. But ultimately, that shot is needed, and it's not an easy experience, but you need that shot and it's for your well-being. I felt it was that way. What keeps you there for me, there's a difference between, I think, somebody who was born into it and then somebody who finds it later. For me, Jesus, that relationship with Jesus, I was taught that he was very real, and that he was with me all day, every day. I would wake up praying to him. Everything I went through from, I'm going to take a test. I pray, please help me. I'm talking to this person. Tell me what to say. I was just talking to and depending on Jesus in every single area of my life. And every thought was, I had like two people in my mind and I ran everything through, and it was just constant conversation. We were one person since I was a child. So I think that helps to blind you when you start to have questions, because it's sort of like a battered woman. You can say, look, these are all the red flags. These are all the things that are bad. And I could start to see the cracks in Christianity, but this is Jesus and I'm not giving up Jesus. It's sort of, that, but I love him. And it really helps to blind you from everything and keep you there. And that was even after all of everything fell apart for me. That relationship with Jesus was losing that and coming to the realization that this is nothing more than an imaginary friend. That was devastating. That kind of tore me apart. And then you're at the lowest of low because you don't even know who you are. It was your identity. That person was everything that you were. And to lose your identity and say, who am I? Like, if not that, I have no reason to live. I have no purpose in my life. And what is the world if you don't exist? And not a good place.
The thing for me is that devastation, very real, right? Of losing that. And also the feeling of like, yeah, I don't actually want people to have to go through the trauma I went through, but I also don't want them in a cult. That's like a hard place to be. And I think, it also speaks to, there's this kind of myth in evangelical Christianity that if people ever leave, one, they'll say something to the effect of like, you were never a real Christian or whatever, like once saved, always saved. So if you left, you were never really saved. Or they might even say the people who leave, they just want to sin, right? Like they just want to, they wanted to go have sex. They wanted to go do drugs. They wanted to go do something that they wanted to go live a life of self-destruction or self-indulgence or whatever. And it's just every former Christian I've talked to, that's literally never happened. I'm like, every person I know who left Christianity had a heartbreaking divorce. Like literally just like had pure devastation. And like, I think that's a point that needs to be brought to more, that like, if you're leaving, you're doing it for the sake of your own personal integrity or for the sake of like trying to find real love and not fake love. That's why people leave. They don't leave because they want to go indulge themselves.
And that's a huge conflict because I know how traumatic it is. And I know how unforgiving and horrible the church can be when you leave, which I didn't imagine. That unconditional love doesn't extend to you after you leave. But I'm also conflicted because I know what it did to my family. And do you do that intentionally to other people? I had a friend, a very close friend, that I grew up with, pastors of a church, and he asked me questions a lot about the Jewish perception of this and what does the text say. And I was kind of nervous. I would like very shallow answer his questions. And then I told him, be careful. You're going to look too far. You're going to learn too much. And you're going to go as far as I did. and he'd laugh and think that was funny. And I wasn't sure whether it was the right thing to do, to say, you should investigate that a little bit more, because I know if he did, he would see it. But at the same time, I know that my best friend, who I grew up with and loved dearly, she wouldn't tolerate that, and it would tear apart their family and their children and their parents, who I thought were my own parents. Like, do you intentionally put that, it was an atomic bomb in my life. I felt like, do you do that to families? It's, I don't want anybody in the church. I don't want them in that cult. But at the same time, it's a tremendous conflict, because I know the pain.
It is a hard spot to be in, for sure. I can empathize with that quite a lot. I just, again, it's like, for me, I know how close to the edge I was. I mean, it was, I've shared this enough. Like, I was drinking to keep myself from jumping off a bridge, when I left Christianity. Like, that's how intense a reaction I was having to it. And I still think it's worth it, like, personally, like, just because, if for no other reason. I mean, there were a couple equations I kind of had to do in order to convince myself to leave. One was just evaluating that I'm a better person when I'm not going to church. And I just needed to, like, reconcile whatever that was. Is the problem me or the church? And I eventually decided, I think it might be the church. And that was not an easy decision to reach, let me tell you, because I thought it was me for the previous 20 plus years, but you're taught it's always your fault because you're imperfect and God is perfect. So it must be you. Again, sounds like an abusive relationship. So that was one equation. And another equation I kind of had to do was, do I want to be associated with this anymore? Like, I could at least recognize what Christianity was perceived at, whether I had, decided that it was a cult or not yet. I still, like, saw, like, the bigotry, and I saw the arrogance, and I saw the abuse and oppression that Christians were not just currently doing, but had a historical track record of doing. And I was like, do I want my name associated with that? Like, is that the group identity I want? And so for me, like, even though I had some miserable years, I'll take 2 extra miserable years to get out of a lifelong servitude, to an ideology that was killing me, and killing my soul. I mean, I felt really sociopathic. This kind of relates to the whole missionary thing. Sociopaths, the whole idea of a sociopath is someone who sees a goal and doesn't care who they hurt to get to that goal. And that's kind of what missionary work is. Like, dress up like a rabbi and call yourself that in order to save people. Or, like, another example would be like, we'll give them some food, but only if they'll, sit down and hear us preach for a minute. Like, all these missionary tactics that are very normal are kind of sociopathic by definition. And I don't know if you think that's too harsh, but that's honestly kind of how I see it.
No, and extremely self-righteous and judgmental. They'll say that they were at the lowest of low and admit all of these sins that they did. But now that they've accepted Jesus, all of a sudden they're clean and they're righteous, and they are extremely judgmental. I think I felt horrible when I realized what a self-righteous horse I was on, and that I had been, violently knocked off of. And I think it has made me a more human person, a more compassionate person, a more respectful person. And, I never thought I would see Christianity in those eyes, but it is the worst of disrespectful and judgmental and self-righteous and abusive. And I look at children being raised in that, and I know that it's comfortable to them and they love it, but I don't agree with the abuse.
I mean, it hurts to think about, for sure. So kind of the way I would wrap this up in my worldview, and feel free to disagree with this, but I see these Christians using coercive tactics in missionary work. of all kinds, but especially evangelical Christians, with the goal of reinforcing allegiance to the cult. So whether they're successful in conversion, praise be God, and if they are rejected and people don't convert, it's because the world hates them like they hated Christ. So like either way, the narrative gets confirmed. So missionary work kind of just helps reinforce the narrative of Christianity, which is like textbook cult tactic. So is that too extreme an accusation to say that's kind of the point of missionary work, is to just reinforce the narrative?
Definitely. And I think everybody sees it in their way. And they, if you're persecuted on the street, and we are dealing with some aggressive street missionaries here who, because we're in a time of such sensitivity and war and a lot of loss and devastation, to hear a missionary on the street saying you're going to hell and you're blind if you Jews are blind and you rejected God and that's why things are happening. People on the street you can't find a person in Israel who hasn't personally lost somebody or has somebody serving and is risking their life right now. So to hear that message of it's your fault because you rejected Jesus makes people want to get violent. And I'm actually scared and worried for the missionaries that are doing that right now because they're invoking a lot of anger. And then you see videos of Jews, aggressively getting in the face of these missionaries, or a mob of Jews that come up to the missionary and start screaming at them. And then the missionary gets to be able to put it on YouTube and say, look at the horrific thing that's happening in Israel. Jews are persecuting Christians. It's ugly. It's not true at all. But it's nasty.
It's nasty business for sure. One kind of last question as we wrap up here, just like, your journey has clearly been like very intense, in a lot of ways. But in some ways it's also somewhat normal, right? Like there's also sort of like you didn't choose to grow up the way you grew up. And then, just kind of step by step, you ended up where you ended up. And it's funny how life kind of sometimes drives you more than you drive life. So I'm wondering, kind of with that perspective, looking back, and now, you're part of a faith that doesn't seek to, convert, you're not out here trying to like convert my audience to Judaism, like you have a completely different ethos, but your neuropaths still exist in the same way. I'm just wondering, for me and even for my audience, like who kind of wrestle with that, like, I don't want to be an evangelical Christian anymore for a different ideology, even though that's kind of what I was trained and bred to be. Like, how can to me, you look like someone who's kind of used your superpowers for good now. Like you've found a way to like do this counter missionary work. Do you think there's any way that, like, is that a redemption arc for you? Or do you think there's a way for other people who leave Christianity to kind of find a path that doesn't involve like this intense trying to convert everybody to what you believe?
I do. And thank God, because of the work I do, I see thousands of Christians coming out of Christianity. I get to witness that, and they all take different paths in life. A lot of them go to no religion at all, become atheists, agnostics, humanists. A lot of, there's a huge movement of B'nai Noach, which actually follow Judaism, but don't go through the conversion, but sort of like, just stand with the Jewish people, because the Jewish Bible is the basis, the baseline for Christianity. So it is somewhat familiar. You're blown away that most of everything you knew was wrong. But there is a movement of, they're called Noachides, or righteous Gentiles. And the 7 laws according to Judaism for righteous Gentiles is not to murder and not to steal, and the things that you would say you're just, being a basic human being. It is difficult to lose that sense of community and support system. I always encourage people to fill that hole with, other things. There are all kinds of social activities to get involved with. We didn't go into, but my father, who was the minister, in his efforts to bring me back, he also studied too much and left. He's no longer a minister.
Wow.
He started a whiskey club, and he got a Jeep and joined a Jeep club, and he's also military, so he joined his local lodge there. You do need to fill that gap, because that is that empty hole that you were raised with that you don't know how to fill. And there's lots of ways to fill that in a not religious, more safe, not controlling way to get that that need that we all have to connect to other people and like-minded people without that cultish pull.
100% agree. That's what I mean. I did music bingo with some people at a brewery for weeks, and then I went to a dive bar pretty regularly, and it's sad. Find your thing for sure. I think is and find your support. I do agree that that's kind of the biggest thing to do, and also make sure you're not joining another cult while you're doing it. I think is kind of the asterisk I'll put. There's a lot of people who leave evangelical Christianity to go right into a sort of militant ideology than just start being an evangelical for something else. But I think if you find a community where you can just be and just exist, and maybe not even have a mission or purpose, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but maybe just don't have a mission for a while, might actually be the right move. To just take the time. Shannon, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to either support your work or learn more about what you're doing, how do they find out more about you? Where's the best place for them to go?
Beynenu.com. It's BEYNEYNU.com. There's a WhatsApp, there's an email, everything is there. You'll find it.
Awesome. Thank you again for coming on. I appreciate all the work you do and the conversation we've had. And thank you, listener, for stopping by. I'll talk to y'all soon. This is the final season of The Cult of Christianity. But this is not the last time I will be investigating religions and cults. If you'd like to continue to follow my work, go to jverner.com or follow my Substack at johnverner.substack.com. You can also continue to support my work by going to thecultofchristianity.com and subscribing for a giant backlog of bonus content and stay up to date when my next big project releases. Thank you for listening, subscribing, sharing, reviewing, and as always, keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.